All right, well, welcome back, everyone. I hope we all had a great break, maybe a little food, maybe a little coffee. I'm ready to enjoy some tremendous content through the balance of the afternoon. Just a couple quick housekeeping items and reminders quickly. We are recording these sessions, so just be aware of that. And we will be making those available later. And also, please remember that if you have questions for any of our presenters, you can ask those in the Q&A, which is down at the bottom of your Zoom application. One other quick note is our next presenter is much like our last presenter of the morning. This is going to be from Prashanth Iyer, and it is recorded. So if you do have a question, feel free to put it in the Q&A. Feel free to put it in the chat, and we will get all of those questions to him after. But without further ado, you don't need to hear from me. You need to hear from smart people. So let's get it going. Prashanth Iyer is going to be presenting on the value of NHL trades. You may have seen his trade machine floating around social media channels. Prashanth is a clinical pharmacist specializing in cardiology by training. He received his Bachelor's of Science in Pharmaceutical Sciences from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill and received his Doctorate of Pharmacy from the UNC Eshelman School of Pharmacy. He has previously worked for The Athletic, Hockey Graphs, SB Nation, and he is the creator of the site Meta Hockey. For more of his work, please see his Twitter, which is at Iyer_Prashanth. And with that, I will turn it over to Prashanth's work.
All right. Good afternoon, everybody. Sorry I cannot be there live to be able to take questions about this at the end of the presentation. But I did want to thank the hosts, Megan Chayka, Allison Lucan, Shirley Mills, Michael Shuckers for the opportunity to record this video so that they can play this for you guys. And then if there are any questions, please feel free to reach out to me via Twitter at Iyer_Prashanth via direct message. I'm more than happy to take any questions about this. What I wanted to talk to you about today is an exciting project that Dom Lucszczysyn and I have been working on for the better part of a year and a half, which is the NHL trade machine. And so the title of our talk today is, Do We Have a Deal? Evaluating Trades in the NHL. And really the purpose of this talk is to be able to contextualize a trade like this. So looking back at the 2017 trade between the Senators, Predators, and Avalanche that resulted in the Senators ending up with Matt Duchene, Predators ending up with Kyle Turris, and then the Avalanche ending up with Sam Girard, and then ultimately Ottawa's 2018 first and third. The 2018 first obviously gets pushed to 2019 and becomes Bowen Byram. How do we really evaluate a trade at the time that it's being made to sort of ascribe value to each of these components and sort of measure how well each team really did? And so when we're looking at kind of the success and failures of a trade, there's a couple of key factors to pay attention to. First and foremost, for an individual team, how well do they really know themselves? How well have they estimated their trajectory? Most trades tend to occur right around the trade deadline, where teams tend to have a pretty good idea of what their short term looks like. However, most teams still don't seem to have a great grasp on what their 5-year or 7-year plans look like, but often make deals that can significantly impact those plans. And so really one thing we want to do is factor in the probabilities for each of those teams, kind of the directions they're heading and how well did they really assess that. Next, we want to look at how well did a team not only assess their trajectory, but then make the appropriate trade, whether it's trading present for future or future for present. And then, in a fixed cap era, although some of you may argue we're not in a fixed cap era thanks to the LTIR situation, but in a fixed cap era, how well does a team actually utilize their cap dollars? Every dollar is valuable. Every dollar goes towards adding value to the team. Each dollar spent must be spent wisely. How well did a team do that? And then last but not least, for the items that have kind of high variance, whether it's a future prospect, a future draft pick, what's the probability of success for those future prospects? What's the probability of success for those future picks obtained? And factoring all that in, we can then begin to understand how well a team performed in a given trade. So to be able to do that, we first have to start by putting everything on the same scale, which has been by far the most challenging aspect of evaluating this. How do you put a future draft pick on the same scale as an unrealized prospect, on the same scale as an active NHL player by evaluation metrics? So that's something we're going to attempt to do today. Being able to contextualize the uncertainty associated with the draft picks and unrealized prospects. And then again, as we talked about, being able to balance present versus future for a team based on their given needs. So I won't dive into too much of this prior work, but I did want to highlight that these were foundational pieces that sort of laid the groundwork for something like the trade machine to exist. I've hyperlinked all the pieces here for you. I would encourage you to go back and kind of review them if you do have more interest in the history of trading in the NHL. I think in particular, Eric Tulsky's piece from 2013 on market value is very, very impactful when it comes to actually assessing why teams do what they do. So to start, let's enter the trade machine, and let's enter the most important piece, which is putting everything on the same scale. And with that, let's enter Dom Lucszczysyn, who has kind of been the Superman for all of this. He unfortunately can't be with us here today, but it is his statistic, Gamescore value added, that we'll be using in the trade machine to put all of the players, picks, and prospects on the same valuation scale. And for him to be the first to do that, we get to dub him Superman. So looking at his metric, Gamescore value added, hereby known as GSVA, it's a 3-year weighted player level linear weight model that was initially devised to look at basically how well a player performed based on box score statistics on a given game. And each component of the linear weight model is individually weighted by recency and regress to the mean. So these are 3-year, it's 3-year weights is what Dom uses, with the most recent year being weighted the most heavily. It is then adjusted for via an aging curve and for usage. And then it's transformed into a metric of wins above replacement, where replacement level for forwards is set as 372nd. Replacement level for defensemen is set as the level of the 186th overall defenseman. If you're not familiar with the metric beyond that, again, I don't want to spend too much time kind of diving into the metric, as it's really Dom's brainchild, and it's just kind of the central piece of the trade machine here. But I've hyperlinked the overview for you there, which you can go back and take a look at and kind of get a better understanding of the model in and of itself. So how we utilize Gamescore value added for active NHL players in the trade machine is pretty straightforward. What we do is Dom has player cards available up on The Athletic, which I've hyperlinked there for you, and they're sorted by each team. These player cards are available for any player that's played greater than 15 games in the prior season. And they reflect a player's current pace and then their projected GSVA. Their projected GSVA is what we're actually going to use within the trade machine, as this is what's regressed and adjusted. So even though a player may be outpacing their current projection, we will use the projection within the trade machine, as this is what's maybe most likely to give us a good estimate for most players. Future seasons beyond the current season are then projected based on an age adjustment. Dom's age adjustment is based on a write-up done by the Evolving Wild Twins, which I've linked for you there. Would encourage you to read that to sort of get an understanding of how Dom arrived at his age adjustment. And then for players that are restricted free agents, this is sort of a unique circumstance where they may not have a contract that spans the entire time that they're under team control. However, because the team retains the rights of an individual player, when we actually calculate the value of that specific player for the duration of time they are under team control, as opposed to just their contract, thereby kind of highlighting the relative importance of maximizing value from your younger players that are on restricted free agent or on entry-level contracts. And so to start, me being a Red Wings fan, this is going to be a very Red Wings heavy presentation. We'll take a look at a player who is an unrestricted free agent at the end of his contract, Dylan Larkin, currently 25 years old. And we can start by first taking a look at his 2022 Gamescore value added. So from Dom's player card, this is his projected game score value added. So even if you look at his player card and notice that his pace is 2.7, because of the weighting of his prior years, his projection is actually 2.2, and that's what we'll use for this current season. We can then look at wins added on contract. That's the projected game score value from this current season, 21-22, plus any years remaining on his contract. And so in Dylan Larkin's case, he has 1 year left on his contract plus this current year for a total of 2 years. And as such, the wins added on contract is his 2021 GSVA plus his projected 2022-2023 GSVA. Taking a restricted free agent, for example, defenseman Moritz Seider, who is 20 years old, we can see that his wins added on contract is a little bit different than Dylan Larkin's. Even though Moritz Seider is only on a 3-year contract, his projected game score value added is from the current year plus all years under team control. And so looking at when Moritz Seider will hit unrestricted free agency, he won't hit that until after the 2027-2028 season. And as such, the Red Wings will have 7 years of team control. So therefore, the wins added on contract is the 7 years of Moritz Seider's performance for the Red Wings. Now, the big number that we haven't talked about yet from those cards is contract value. And this is kind of a unique approach to sort of evaluating how well a team spends their dollars. And so what we can do with contract value is first, we estimate how much does a win cost under a given salary cap. And so Dom has sort of derived this based on contract projections from Evolving Hockey and the performance of players and game score value added, to where each position sort of has a benchmark value based on the number of wins provided. So most elite forwards and most elite players tend to come in around the 3-win mark. And that sort of salary there lines up. But you can see that hypothetically, if you had a forward playing at a 5-win projected GSVA, that forward would be worth $17 million in an $81.5 million cap. A defenseman playing at that pace would be $18.7 million, and a goalie playing at that pace would be $11.2 million. And you can see the breakdowns there by wins provided at each position. So what we can then do is by taking that monetary value for wins, we can then convert that each player's contract into an estimated game score value added, and then look at how much value is a player providing above what they're being paid. So for example, if a player is being paid $1 million and that player is a forward, you can see there that that's a 0-win player. So we would convert their contract over in game score value added, and that would end up being 0. And so if they're a 1 game score value added player, it'd be 1 minus 0 plus 1. So ultimately, they're giving you an extra win above what they're being paid, if that makes sense. And what this sort of allows us to do is estimate really performance above a particular contract and really how well a team is spending their dollars. Note that this is going to be definitely biased towards restricted free agents who may be on entry-level contracts. So in Moritz Seider's case, you know, his average annual value is $863,333 right now. That's converting to less than 0 wins effectively. And so he is basically anything that he's providing for you right now is gravy. And therefore his contract value is going to be well above what he's being paid. And as such, he's going to be adding a lot of value for the money there. And then note that for players that have contracts beyond 2022 and 2023, the salary cap is estimated. So Dom and I sort of have arbitrary estimates of where we think the salary cap is going based on kind of discussions thus far. However, we could be very, very wrong. You know, for example, the cap hasn't moved in the last couple of years due to COVID. And as such, estimates may be imprecise beyond 2022, 2023. So putting all of those pieces together, we can look at a simple player-for-player trade that happened this past year, Ethan Bear for Warren Foegele. And this is kind of a nice trade to look at because Ethan Bear and Warren Foegele were both restricted free agents at the time of the trade. However, Foegele thereafter signed a contract with Edmonton. And as such, we included the contract here as a part of the trade, whereas Bear has only 1 year on his contract, but 2 years left under team control. And so focusing on Bear first, we can see that the wins added under contract for Bear is the sum of his game score value added for 2022, plus the 2 years he's under team control, which is 23 and 24. His contract value is then calculated using his game score value above his salary for 2022, but because he has no contract in place for 2023 and 2024, we simply just add his game score value added for those seasons to the contract value for 2022 to avoid over or underestimating significantly based on qualifying offer. For Foegele, we can very simply calculate his wins added on contract for the 3 years he's under his deal, and his contract value is the same, the 3 years he's under his deal with the money that's currently in place. And as such, we can make a trade evaluation here. The next piece that's probably the most challenging piece is really contextualizing uncertainty, and where it tends to come into play is with draft picks and prospects. And again, being able to take draft picks and sort of turn them and put them on the same scale as active players is a huge feat. And for that, I dubbed Dom Captain Canada for being able to figure that out. There's obviously been a lot of attempts to evaluate the value of a draft pick historically. I'm not going to go into all of them, but I grouped them here for you based on the metric used to sort of derive value. And so most of them have followed ice time. A couple have looked at games played. Dawson Spriggins, now at the Colorado Avalanche, used point shares from Hockey Reference. But probably most famously, and the one that stuck around the longest, is the one from Michael Schuckers in 2016, looking at ice time in the 7 years after draft based on draft position, and then sort of assigning a scaled value to it to sort of assess pick-to-pick value. And Schuckers has developed this draft pick value chart. However, each of these metrics sort of has a limitation in that it's not the best estimate of really player performance. And a lot of that has to do with just availability of metrics at the time. You know, the NHL data didn't really start to pick up until 2007, 2008. So a lot of these early looks simply didn't have enough years of good data to really work with something a little bit more robust in terms of player evaluation. And so what Dom did was try to look at draft pick value through the lens of game score value added. And so what Dom did is he took all seasons since 2007, and he looked at the game score value added over a player's first 7 seasons from each draft pick slot. For players that didn't have a full 7 seasons, so example, Austin Matthews has 4 seasons at the time Dom did this, he filled in the missing 3 seasons with what his projected GSVA would be for them so that they had a complete 7-year set. He then fit this curve with an exponential power law fit optimized to minimize the average error. And as a result, you can see the corresponding draft pick value curve derived here. And what I want to call your attention to really is how steep the drop-off is within the first round. So simply going from pick 1 to pick 5, you're already at 50% of the value of pick 1. And that's a substantial drop-off. And the drop-off continues to pick up as you progress through the round. You know, by the time you hit pick 10, you're only at 1/3 of the value of the first overall pick. And by the time you're hitting your first pick outside of the lottery, you're at 25% of the value. By the time you're hitting the last pick of the first round, you're down to 12% of the value. And by the time you're hitting, the first pick of the second round and the first pick of the third round, you're really looking at picks that are not largely different from each other when assessing simply average value. And so the way we choose to look at draft picks in the trade machine is for picks that are going to be occurring in the upcoming draft. So for this season, it would be the 2022 draft. For picks in the first and second round, where there is a lot of pick-to-pick variability value, the value of each team's pick in those rounds is calculated based on their expected final standings position at the time of the trade, combined with the relative lottery odds for each draft slot for lottery picks. So hypothetically, let's say the Red Wings had a 50% chance at finishing 10th, 30% chance at finishing 9th, and a 20% chance at finishing 8th. We would then blend the lottery odds for picks 8, 9, and 10 to generate the value of the first round pick for the Detroit Red Wings. And that would be the value of that pick at that time. For picks beyond the second round, where value tends to not differ all that much within the round, we simply assigned the median value of a pick from that round. So you can see those median values listed there. And for any picks beyond the current or the upcoming draft, what we simply did here was we just assigned the median value of the pick, because there's a lot of variance from year to year in terms of team results, that it was difficult to really truly get a good enough estimate where we felt comfortable to use standings position to project value. And as such, future picks carry a lot of variance in them and may be under or overestimated in value depending on which team you're trading for. For example, Colorado getting Ottawa's conditional 2018 first round pick. So looking at how we value those sort of picks in a deal, we'll look at a trade from last trade deadline, the Jacob Vrana for Anthony Mantha deal, which also contained a pick from Washington, the 2021 first and their 2022 second. Looking at the value of the 2021 first, you can see that the value here of 3.5 is less than the median value of 4.7 for a first round pick. And that's because, since this was the pick in the upcoming draft, the value here was calculated based on Washington's expected standings finish at the time of the trade. So Washington was projected to be a good team, a playoff team, pretty clearly not going to be in the lottery. And as such, this pick carried less value than the median pick from the first round, pick worth only 3.5 here instead of 4.7. You can see the second round pick, though, because it was for the future year, was just simply assigned the median value of the second round pick of 1.7. The next piece of uncertainty that we have to deal with is prospects. And I'll be honest with you, as much as I've tried to look into prospects, I still don't have any idea what I'm doing. Mad props to everybody out there who is doing a lot of prospect work, and particularly those for teams who are doing a great job with drafting. It is very difficult, very challenging. I love using this XKCD comic to basically tell you that, you know what, we talk a big game, but I have no idea what I'm doing here. And so to keep things simple for the trade machine, I mentioned previously that Gamescore value added is only available for players who played greater than 15 games in the prior season. So for prospects that are within 7 years of their draft, so let's say someone is drafted, in 2019 and it's now 2020, so they haven't played yet, but they're 1 year out from their draft. The GSVA projections are based on where they were selected in the draft. So the fourth overall pick will have the fourth overall pick draft odds. It'll have that draft value. And then depending on how far out they are from their draft, we attempt to penalize the expected value of that player by sort of penalizing the players that take longer to reach. And the way we do this, we take that value of the draft pick. So if the value is 10 and they're now 3 years out, we would do 10 divided by 7 and then multiply that by 3 and subtract that from 10 to get their value at that point in time. It's very imprecise. It is a very rough estimate, and as such, there should be a lot of variance here. However, it was the most straightforward way for us to be able to incorporate prospects not in the NHL, given that there's not really standard systems to utilize and compare sort of each of the leagues at the moment. For players not in the NHL who are beyond 7 years since their draft, these are usually players that are playing internationally that are maybe coming over for the first time, or players that are sort of going to be fill-in players for injuries. We just assign these players the 10th percentile game score value added based on their position, recognizing that there may be some players in the NHL who are better than a small percentage of current players, but not likely better than a majority of players. So when we go to evaluate a trade that sort of has all of these different components, we can look at a trade from this past trade deadline, the Andrew Kopp deal for the New York Rangers, and we can see a few different things here. One, the trade machine allows us to evaluate the value of a conditional pick provided here. This conditional pick being elevating to a first if the Rangers were to make the conference finals and Copp plays greater than 50%. So using the probability of the Rangers doing that, we can assign a contract value here. We can estimate the value of a prospect not yet in the NHL, Morgan Barron. We can project the value of a current player in Andrew Copp. And then we can estimate the value of a future draft pick. And putting it all together, we can sort of get a contract value added to contract value added comparison. And so then the last piece is really assessing how well teams do in assessing their stock and being able to do present versus future valuation. And so we'll look at a couple of different trades from this past trade deadline. I think one trade that's a good example of this is Calgary and Seattle making the trade for Calle Jarnkrok and a couple of picks going the other direction. From a contract value added standpoint, the summary looks pretty good. But one thing I sort of want to point out here is these two teams are in vastly different positions. Calgary, contender in the Western Conference, potentially Stanley Cup Finals contender, a team that can make a run for it all. Their main focus is the 2022 number. They're focused on the wins added in that regard. And they're not so much worried about the future unrealized potential of some of those draft picks. Seattle, on the other hand, an expansion team, focused on adding potential prospects, adding those wins there, not necessarily focused on the present. So another example of a trade that's potentially a win-win is Toronto and Seattle. Again, Toronto acutely recognizing that in order to contend in the Eastern Conference, they're going to need to load up. They bring in Mark Giordano, they bring in Colin Blackwell, a couple of guys who should immediately add to their 2022 team, and you can see 2.3 wins added there for this season. Seattle, on the other hand, more interested in adding down the road. And so over the lifespan of those draft picks, we expect those draft picks to add about 3.3 wins over the lifespan on the count of the contract. And then maybe an example where a team didn't do so well. Washington, towards the bottom of the Eastern Conference playoff picture, but still very much going to be in the playoff race there, adds Marcus Johansson, a player who maybe isn't as high caliber as adding a guy like Mark Giordano, and they pay a steep price in Daniel Sprung and a couple of picks to Seattle, to where Seattle not only wins the short term, but they are most likely going to win the long term of this deal as well. So I know it's a lot of information thrown at you there. I wanted to sort of succinctly summarize what I think the limitations of the trade machine are and kind of where we'd like to go in the future. Current limitations, contract value may not be accurately forecasted for restricted free agents, as I mentioned, without contracts in place. For future draft picks, the value represented is the median value, and there can be a significant degree of variance associated with the pick depending on the round. For prospects not in the NHL, I think this is probably the most volatile component of the trade machine, as we're relying on their draft position and not post-draft performance. And then finally, contract value calculations beyond 2022, 2023 are based on an estimated cap escalation and may be imprecise. So where we'd like to go in the future, we'd like to be able to optimize blending of present and future value. This was brought up to me by Michael McCurdy the other day. Potentially there is a way that instead of having to look at 2022 versus future, we could blend that into one number, either via discounted cash flow, hyperbolic discounting, something along those lines to maybe better represent the overall summary of a trade. We can look into the valuation of no move and no trade clauses and how that impacts what a team can receive in a trade. As such, maybe the Claude Giroux trade is an example of that for Philadelphia. We'd like to investigate better ways to estimate at least top prospects post-draft and potentially provide an estimate of variance for future draft picks. And then really last but not least, I've been slacking here. This has been made really since December 2020. I need some help taking the trade machine public. I'd like to be able to get it live summer 2022. So if you've got skills in website hosting and are familiar with Shiny Code, please message me. I'd be more than happy to pay you for your time to sort of help me and Dom get this thing live so that people can have some fun with it. Again, my apologies that I can't be there in person, but please don't hesitate to reach out to me. My DMs are open on Twitter at @Iyer_Prashanth. And if you have any questions, please let me know. Otherwise, thank you.
Well, thank you, Prashanth. That was awesome. I know the trade machine is something people look to every trade season when that's going on. And so if you can help Prashanth out as well, I know he'd love that. You can message him on Twitter, as he said, or if you do have additional questions, feel free to put them in our Q&A or our chat, and we'll get those over to him as well.